Yeah, definitely. Like the phrase I use is like, being able to look around corners. It's that, as you build more and more of that experience, you can sort of, that ability to try and see the future or what the potential future options are, depending on which course of action you take. And like you say, if you've got a more technical or sort of more problem-solved issue, you're more focused on the issue. You focus on the particular issue that's in front of you. Whereas I suppose I try to take a position where I'm more focused on the bigger picture, the strategy, and also the relationships. I'm looking at the human aspect of how, and whether that's in an environment like this or whether that's in business and you're working with clients and suppliers and customers, I'm sort of looking at the human dynamic and how that works, of where we want to get to, and then you're manipulating the variables within that to try and support that sort of bigger goal.
Awesome. Another exciting episode of the Few podcast. And I don't know what it's like where you are up in sunny Queensland, Shawnee. Beautiful one day, perfect the next. But here in Sydney, it's freezing. Freezing. It's a cold snap. Polar vortex has hit the eastern seaboard of Australia. And you've just been in Darwin too, haven't you?
I have, mate. I've been there for 18 days. So coming back here, it's like, it's a bit chilly here, and I think it's 24 today. So I guess you're acclimatized to different places where you are quite quickly.
Oh, yeah. And as I was driving in today to the studio for our next guest, I started to kind of run one of those change perspective mindsets, because our guest today, it's probably a little bit colder where he is compared to where we are right now. And 7.5 degrees is a cold morning in Sydney is probably just your average summer's day. So look, I think it's time to introduce our next guest, direct from Macquarie Island, down near Antarctica. Is Derek Stevens, the station commander, station manager, the head honcho, the boss. Derek, g'day, mate. Thanks so much for being on the Few podcast with Sean and I today.
Oh, look, g'day, Boo. G'day, Sean. Nice to meet you, and thank you for the invitation. I'm very passionate about what I do down here, so I'm excited about having a chat and sort of giving you a bit of an insight about, life down here and what we do and how you get there.
Amazing.
So where does 7.5 degrees fit in on an average day down at Macquarie Island?
Oh, look, that'd be stinking hot, mate. So I was out on Monday. So we just had a long weekend. So I went out for a little sort of wander and a bit of a walk on Monday, and I think it was about 4 degrees and not much wind, and I was stinking hot. So I was sweating, sort of walking around in my gear while I was waiting for a bit of wind or a bit of cold weather to come. So, but yeah, it's you get a different perspective down here. So for 4 or 5 degrees, definitely walking around. Oh, look, cold day is probably around zero. Like we're surrounded by ocean. We're not on the ice. So for us, anything around zero, but it's the wind. We're in the furious 50s zone down here, so the winds do smash into us. So it's the wind chill at a cold day, which really makes a difference. So sort of -10 with wind chill would probably be a pretty cold day for us.
Awesome. So I guess the first question that came to mind when we heard that you were going to jump onto the podcast was why? Why? What was it that made your decision to go and invest a year of your life down on Macquarie Island?
Yeah, look, I did have a think about that, because I thought, what's the first question that always someone asks? And they always ask, why the hell do you go and move away from your friends and family and life for a year, for arbitrarily a fairly random thing to do? And for me, like, that desire has always been there. I can't really say why. It's actually, I would say this has been pottering around in the back of my mind for at least 10 to 15 years. And I think the real reason is just because the uniqueness of the opportunity. It's just one of those things, in life where it's just completely different, completely out of the mainstream, and you just get to immerse yourself in something that's completely different and wild and so thoroughly engaging and enjoyable.
And pretty left field, if you think about it, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Look, there's not that, and there's not that many people that do it. There's quite a few sort of Antarctic stations from different countries around the world, but the reality is we're talking about probably hundreds of people that do this every year across the across the world. It's not a significant number. And, over the years, Australia's had a station here at Macquarie Island ever since 1948. So we're the 74th year of operation. And, we're only talking about a relatively small, in the low thousands of people over that sort of 75-year time frame who have experienced it. So
how many people are there?
It definitely...
So how many people there at any given
There's a team of
point in time?
16. There's a team of 16 here over winter. The populations generally vary quite different over the winter and summer. Summer is when you get a big influx of scientists and other people doing various work. But the core crew are those that do the 12 months, or what we'd call winterers.
16. God, can you imagine? I mean, I went to the Falkland Islands for 6 weeks. And there's like 1,000 people there, and even then you got kind of sick, everyone, after 6 weeks. Well, how do you do it? I mean, yeah, true. Yeah, if you're the only one in the room that thinks everyone else is a pain in the ass, you're probably the pain in the ass, right? Yeah. It's when we look at we're talking about the few here, so we're talking about small, individuals that are doing things that no one else does, so you're kind of unique. But then on top of that, you're running this really small team in an incredibly isolated place. And I'd imagine guys like Elon Musk would be looking down there and saying, oh, what's it like living in a small, isolated place with a view to what it must be like in Mars? What are some of the challenges as a leader when running a small, remote team, both, I guess, in terms of work, but equally all the social elements of it? Because it's not like you just you get in your snow buggy and go home at the end of the day, right? You work and live and cohabitate. There must be some really unique challenges there.
It is. So that, look, the primary challenge of the environment is that those that you work with are also those that you live with, and also those that you socialize with, and you can't get away from each other. And once you're there, you're there. There's sort of the ship drops you off and you get a kiss on the cheek and waves goodbye, and it says, we'll see you in a year or so. Do a good job and have a good year. So it's implicit with everyone that comes down. And obviously we go through a very extensive selection process, which is somewhat aligned with what you'd expect with sort of a space program, particularly in terms of its medical and other sort of psychological sort of assessment criteria, that it's implicit that people are buying into that small community and living in a place where there's high degrees of tolerance, patience, trust, and a willingness to work towards developing a community that has, is based on very solid values and behaviors, where you do work together, you do make compromises, and you accept that, you want to live in this sort of close environment. Now, architecting that is a different process, because, when the people turn up, no one knows each other. We're sort of 4 weeks before we sailed down here, the majority of the people hadn't met each other, hadn't worked together, and you don't really know that person that well. So as the station leader, your primary role is to facilitate the environment in which people can get to know each other and build trust and cooperate and work together. And it's a very subtle process. It's quite different to leadership in business. It's very much a community-led, and you're fostering the environment where the community can think about and make good decisions for itself about how it wants to live and work.
What's some of the biggest challenges you've faced then in that environment? So, potentially there's obviously the situation of personality clashes or value misalignments, and literally people just feeling isolated, and as you said, Boo, getting a bit sick of each other maybe at some times. What's the biggest challenge you've found, and how have you addressed that as a leader?
Look, the biggest challenges, and look, some of these things I will be cautious in how I speak, because some of these things actually, some of these things are real life, and they actually sort of are happening now. So it's sort of, and some of these things just aren't for,
hypothetically speaking,
for
on
public
another
discussion. So
another remote island.
So look, the reality is, at a most simplistic value, you do have people who hard times happen whilst they're away. Like people get sick, people get cancer, family members die, or something happens. So the reality is, people's lives keeps moving whilst they're down here, and it's part of that whilst you're there that sometimes some fairly serious things can happen at home, and you're in a place where you can't affect that. So that obviously affects people's health and well-being and and their mental health. Some people, again, in a worst case scenario, some people think they're right, they look like they're assessed, but they struggle with the remoteness. And I would say sort of managing all those various well-being aspects in terms of people's mental health and well-being is sort of the biggest challenges, so that when here, relatively minor things can appear to be a major setback for someone. So it's helping people keep that perspective of understand what's important, what's not important, recognizing why they're here. And it's about establishing individual relationships with everyone. So you understand that person, you understand what their drivers are, you understand what their triggers are, so that when someone's having a hard time, A, you can try and anticipate it and prevent it, and B, put the mechanisms in place to solve that. So look, 99% of what I do is preventative. It's about looking at things and looking at the way the mood of the community and individuals are moving and seeing what adjustments or things need to be made, and then doing that in a subtle way. So it's not, it's not a place for steep corrections or changes. It's so that it sort of becomes part of the flow of life.
And what does a week look like down there? Are you on Monday to Friday kind of organisation, or is it just a constant blend of personal life and work? And I'd imagine some of the work down there is just mind-blowing in terms of what you see, what's around you. The isolation in itself must be like a kind of nice thing compared to the hustle and bustle. So what does an average week look like for you as a team?
Well, look, to an extent, even though, look, we're people with normal jobs in an extraordinary place. So, of that population of 16, if you can imagine a small village, there's sort of one of everyone. There's a chef, there's a doctor, there's a sparky, there's a couple of chippies, there's plumbers, there's all those people that you need to make sure everything works and everything's safe. And we have a relatively normal day. You start work at 7:30. The majority of the work we do is maintenance. The workforce over winter is predominantly a trades-based team. And most of the work they're doing is facility maintenance. It's a pretty harsh environment. So it's just keeping the place ticking over and going. But amongst that, there's some fairly interesting opportunities. So, we're living on a place that is, one of essentially the Galapagos of the SubAntarctic. So we literally live amongst millions of breeding SubAntarctic animals, seals, penguins, whales, all sorts of birds, take your pick at it. So there's a whole bunch of sort of science projects that are ongoing to monitor both the environment and the wildlife down here. And there's the opportunities for people to participate in, be helpers with the scientists and the rangers and those sorts of things. And the reality is you just observe it. It's outside your door. There's so much of it. You sort of, you walk to work, you can barely stop yourself from kicking a penguin as you walk past. They're everywhere.
By accident?
By accident. Yeah. And look, and sometimes, sometimes someone can't get out the door of their room because an elephant seal's decided to go to sleep on that door. So they need to find a different way out. So it's, these fairly random.
King's Cross on a Saturday night.
Yeah, which to us, it normalizes very quickly. So the environment here normalizes very quickly. You just get used to it, but you have to sort of step your mind back to a few months when you first arrived, and it sort of blew your mind as you as arrived. And there's I could regale for ages of some of the things you see here, which are just off the charts.
Yeah, I thought it was entertaining when you said just before we started the recording that you just look out the window and there's penguins and seals and stuff. It's like it's such a different context that unless you experience it, I guess, it's something kind of surreal in a way. So another question that's come up for me is I assume that you've had a bit of an adventurous spirit to sort of go outside the live outside the box and do other things. Now, what maybe give us a little bit of an insight into some of the background that you've had in relation to doing, I suppose, adventurous things or things that are slightly different and that only really, again, some of the few actually choose to do.
Yeah, so for me, I've always been motivated by sort of travel or exploration, sort of not so much to an extreme level, but just something that's, that see me sort of live and work and overseas in different countries. Like home for me is New Zealand. I'm Australian, but I've sort of lived in New Zealand for the last 8 years, where my partner and I sort of live rurally on a sort of a block where we've always had the dream of sort of, doing that sort of off the grid sort of sustainable style living. So we've built a life for us there where we do that. And But look, I've travelled a lot, and I've sort of started life in the army, and the army sort of took me all over the place. But it's, yeah, I've sort of to some extent followed my nose. I had an extensive period living and working in Asia, where I've sort of pretty much sort of worked and travelled from Pakistan across from Japan, now sort of down to Macquarie Island and sort of most countries in between. So those sort of desires to just keep expanding my horizons has been a big motivator.
So how do you manage that, mate? Like there's clearly a lot of expectation management. You're living a dream. You're having these opportunities. How do you maintain a relationship, and how does everyone down there stay connected with the real world? And do you find over time it's a challenge to stay connected?
Yeah, it definitely is. Like the reality is the majority of the people that work in this life are single, sort of regardless of age. So it does to some extent self-select. And also in terms of age groups, you generally tend to get people who say are a bit younger, say late 20s, early 30s, or people in sort of north of 50s. There's not too many in the age where kids, people have got kids and young families. So the population does sort of spread itself around where people are in life. But there are people here who've got, wives, families, and all that sort of stuff. And look, we're very lucky. It's got good communications, like the way we're speaking here on this and WhatsApp, and it does require, the relationship to be in pretty good, in a pretty good condition. And you need to keep investing in that whilst you're here. It's sort of not the place to escape to. If your relationship had been having a few troubles or difficulties, sort of spending a year down here is certainly not going to improve it.
Yeah, I think you must have a very understanding partner if you're like, hey, honey, I'm going to go away and live on a remote island with 15 other people for a year. It's that's something really positive, And how do you guys maintain, maintain that just really good quality communication, or what do you find is the basis for sustaining that at distance?
Look, I think initially it was very strong support. So it was we're operating from a very clear basis of understanding of the way we want to live and what our dreams and aspirations are. And Hazel, my partner, was very understanding that she knew this had been a long-term goal of mine and was very supportive in doing that. But the main thing for us is communication. Like the reality is separation's hard. There's actually nothing that sort of makes it easy. It's just about, we talk every day. I stay very engaged in our life back at home, so I know what's going on, and as much as possible, she starts to understand what day-to-day life is here, what people's names are. So we're still try to maintain as much normality as we can between I know what's going on in her life, she knows what's going on in my life, and we maintain that level of communication even through the times when there's a few rough days, just so we're still providing that level of support.
Yeah, it makes you think about how tough it would have been, 20, 30 plus years ago, because you said that station's been there for 74 years. People not having ability to communicate at all externally using technology, that would have just made it exponentially more challenging and more difficult.
I think it was just back in those days, hard people, hard families, hard lives. None of this first world stuff. Hey, so Derek, obviously you're one of the few that's living those life dream. I mean, there's only a few station commanders around. What was the process like? And what did you have to do to land this job? Obviously, you didn't go, oh, look, seek.com looking for a station commander. I'm going to whack my CV in, and 4 weeks later, you're on board and away you go. What was involved in achieving the dream?
So it ends up being about a 6-month long process. So the process, it sort of initially starts through, they get quite a significant amount of applications, and applications are only open every 2 years. And initially, it just goes through any other process. There's a paper cut and a phone interview, and they try and shortlist down to about 50 odd people. They then have a series of sort of residential selection activities. And as the station leader, the first one you go through is with all expeditioners. So it's chefs, carpenters, plumbers, station leaders, everyone in together. And that's a 24-hour activity, which is residential based, and it's predominantly around a lot of scenario-based discussions around some of the trickier sort of aspects that you might have around here, just to see where people's values and culture, how they work in a team, how they communicate, how they manage conflict. They then, as a normal expeditioner, that's the end of the road for you. If you make it through that, you're then selected, and then there's sort of technical assessment. For the station leaders, the numbers are then culled down to another sort of 15 or 20, and then there's basically a week-long, sort of a similar activity for about a week in Hobart, where it's just a much more extensive and in-depth sort of version in that, with some activities indoors, some activities outdoors, team-based, individual-based, just really trying to get a good understanding of how you think and how you work and how you lead. And also that's done in an area of very low or high uncertainty. So you don't get any feedback. You don't know how you're going. There's no feedback, positive, negative. It's just purely, you're just there, and you see how you go. And at the end, it's literally at the end, you're either, you go to the bus where you passed, or you go to the bus where you didn't pass. And those that pass, you then go on to it's that brutal.
And then they must have copied the book from Fighter Pilot Recruitment. You're a mushroom until you're not.
And then you go through, and then you go through some more discussions and further, and in parallel to that, there's medical and psychological and other sort of tests. So it's pretty extensive.
Very cool. Very cool. I can imagine what it's like. I remember now when I was, 17, 18, going through that process, and it's quite unsettling. It's just literally you're in the moment, and it's over, and it's next thing, and you just watch as the room whittles away, and you're like, even when you win, you're like, or you get in, you're like, that was a really unsatisfactory win. It's like, you just become that person.
Look, my biggest observation through the process, and probably one of the biggest differentiators, was the people's ability to deal with uncertainty. And that was the main thing, because to some extent you're going down here, it's sure, there's frameworks and there's rules and systems, processes and all that sort of stuff. But the reality is there's a lot of variables in the people and the environment and the way it changes, and you're operating on your own. Like, there's no one. If something goes wrong, there's no one coming to help you. You're pretty much, you're reasonably isolated down here. So that needs people who.
What does happen? Like if you have a heart attack or break a leg, what happens?
Well, we've got a doctor, we've got a medical, facility, and all that sort of stuff. So all that sort of basic level of stuff. But we try to risk manage a lot of that sort of stuff out. You risk manage a lot of the health stuff out through, extremely extensive medical testing that is, very much aligned with what you'd expect to see with, say, an astronaut going to space for an extended period. Because, if you're got a winter in Antarctica, you may as well be on the moon. You're sort of, no one's, you're a long, long way away from anything. And then also just with our systems and practices, we run a pretty low risk organisation down here in terms of the way we work and the way we do things. So that's the primary means, but sometimes things go wrong, and we just we've got a lot of resources and systems down here. But again, if something does go wrong, there's no one quickly coming. Where we are, we're 1,500 kilometres southeast of Hobart. You can't fly here. It's not an easy place to get to.
Obviously, Derek, you're a leader of a small team down there, and that is the same for most businesses. Businesses don't run themselves. There's people involved, and a big business has a big leadership team. And one thing I've observed working in that space, in the corporate space for about 6 years, is there's an aversion to having critical conversations or being critical, or there's a bit of a personality clash, and it might take years before that's resolved, and a year you don't have that sort of time. So what would be your sort of top 2 or 3 tips you'd give to a leader to manage some of those emotional elements of a team?
Yeah. Look, it's a really good question, and it's also very topical, because down here, I'd say we still haven't fully got it nailed. One of the biggest barriers to that is that I think people have a perception that one of the qualities of an effective team is a lack of conflict. And to some extent here is one of the issues where people will bury grievances or bury issues and that sort of stuff and not communicate them, which is not healthy. And that's one of the areas that often does create problems in the future. You sort of, to some extent, you sort of lay your own landmines for the future by sort of not flushing this stuff out and having it. So I think in terms of characteristics, which I think would be best practice, I think the first one is is the first one is to manage expectations, is to people understand what actually a good team looks like, how a good team performs, and how what actually sort of productive conflict looks like. Secondly, to actually make that work is that there needs to be a very high level of trust between the individuals. So all the activities you do through your team building and the way you work is to sort of be constantly sort of building upon those layers of trust. So there's a level of trust there that when people do want to have a difficult conversation or do have those discussions, they actually feel that they can do that and the person's got their best interest in mind. And then lastly, you need to give people the tools to have those discussions. They're not easy discussions for anyone, regardless of your experience or where you're from. So it's giving people the tools and the techniques by which they can sort of start that difficult conversation and then have it without triggering a negative response from the other person. So they're actually sitting there going, actually, that's great. Actually, thank you for bringing that point up. It's actually really relevant, and using that feedback as gold rather than a spear being thrown at you.
So in extension to that, that's awesome. I mean, in extension to that, obviously, I totally agree with that thing is that people start to bottle it up. It comes out much more, charged when it finally does come out, for want of a better term.
Yeah.
So clearly you've got a strong understanding of leadership, of how people tick from a psychology perspective and communication, things like that. Who was it that inspired you, throughout your life to move in towards, or inspired you to become the leader that you are today?
I would say there's an accidental element to it. My background is I'm a generalist. I'm not I'm not an engineer or I'm not a scientist or something like that. I went to the Australian Defence Force Academy.
Can we unpack that? This is the first time on a few podcasts I've heard the word "I'm a generalist," and I've got a really great mate that we always used to talk about this role of the generalist. Unpack that. That's great, because I think it's one of the least valued but most important type of leader is a generalist. So what's a generalist? Why don't you build on that for us?
So what I'll focus on. So look, if I had to describe myself, if I was going to work somewhere or do something, what differentiates me is the two things. Is that one, I can lead change, and two, I can build teams, and the two go together. And I've worked across quite a few different industries now. I've sort of either between the military or engineering and construction is where I've spent most of my time, but I've worked in defense, I've worked in security, I've worked in pharmaceuticals, oil and gas, construction, and now in this sort of Antarctic environment. I've found the core skills you need to be successful at sort of management are all very similar, and the sort of problems you deal with. Sure, the technical aspect of the problems you're trying to solve are different, but I think the bit that's missing and the bit that's least common in people that are working is that ability to easily sort of define a problem, or at least help a group define what a problem is, talk through what the different options are of how to solve it, and go through sort of some structured decision-making process by which you can sort of solve a problem, get everyone together, focus on it, and keep going. And I think that's it's a generic skill set, but it's not one that's easy to teach. You sort of learn it over time. It's sort of like, I was sure I had some skills in it 20 years ago, but it's something you keep getting better at over and over as you go. And it's the same with like leadership. You never suddenly become a leader. You've sort of, sure, you're in roles where you've got leadership responsibility or your management in your title, but it's actually something you keep on learning and building. And certainly in my view, if you're going to be good at it, you're constantly sort of unpacking and looking at how can I learn a bit more? How can I do it a bit differently? What did I learn from that last job? What do I take on to the next one? And it's that constant cycle of learning, which for me is really, really enjoyable.
I think I have to agree with that, Derek. The myself also, I'm a generalist. I don't have a specialist. I'm not a specialty in anything. I don't have a uni degree or anything like that. Everything's come from those experiences that I've had moving through different industries, having different businesses, moving into more of into the mentoring space and changing that based on where I felt I needed to go. One of the things that I've seen, I guess, from a generalist perspective, and I'll get your take on this too, it's almost like once you become very strong at that more general approach, it's like I can see things that other people can't see. It's almost like my vision is wider, whereas a specialist can see deeper. Do you feel that as well?
Yeah, definitely. Like the phrase I use is like, being able to look around corners. It's that, as you build more and more of that experience, you can that ability to try and see the future or what the potential future options are, depending on which course of action you take. And like you say, if you've got a more technical or sort of more problem solved issue, you're more focused on the issue. You focus on the particular issue that's in front of you. Whereas I suppose I try to take a position where I'm more focused on the bigger picture, the strategy, and also the relationships. I'm looking at the human aspect of how, and whether that's in an environment like this or whether that's in business and you're working with clients and suppliers and customers, I'm sort of looking at the human dynamic and how that works and where we want to get to. And then, you're manipulating the variables within that to try and, support that sort of bigger goal.
And it's important for, the generalists listening to this podcast to, and I've felt that in the past too, is that it's almost like a specialist has a higher value. Well, they might have a higher value in that specialty, but a generalist has a higher value strategically, I believe. So both, it's the same level of value, but
I think also, Sean,
different.
Oh, sorry, mate.
You go.
No, I was just going to say, as a generalist as well, if you're a really good generalist, it's like you almost have nothing to do. Because you've built a great plan, you're on top of things, Everything's moving in sync. And I think whereas a specialist or a technical person's always busy because they're fixing something or delivering something. There's work to do. So I always find as a generalist, as one myself, that there's sometimes you're like, should I be doing something right now? And it's those moments where you should be saying, actually, I'm obviously doing an okay job right now because no one's screaming, nothing's broken, everything's working in harmony, and you become a little bit of a sine wave type of effort curve, whereas it just seems to all go wrong real quick, and then you got to unpack it, problem solve it, fix it, and then you go back into that sort of ebb mode where you can just look out the window and count penguins.
Oh, look, and I 100% agree with you, mate. Look, it describes my view perfectly, and to some extent, I actually, with my nature, I enjoy that ebb and flow of like I enjoy the peaks and the troughs. Like enjoy the energy that comes from the peaks when you sort of build something up, and then you're rewarded by the trough. But the reality is, say you've got a team of 20 people or whatever it is, you're working out how to generate each week 800 hours of productive work from that team. I see lots of managers as the busier and busier they just get busier and busier themselves, and they're suddenly churning out 70 or 80 hours a week, and the overall team's productivity is going downwards. They're sort of going nuts trying to solve with their problems rather than sitting back and taking the time and work out, how do I get everyone working rather than just constantly spinning the wheel faster myself? Because, whether you're doing 70 hours or 80 hours or whatever, your law of diminishing returns kicks in pretty quickly. Whereas the law of returns, if you manage to get an extra 5% out of 20 or 30 or 100, or, it scales up pretty quickly, working out how to get a little bit more value out of the team collectively, the benefits are massive.
And Dirk, when you're a generalist and as you're trucking through life, at what point did you kind of become have strength in your conviction as a leader? Like, when did you kind of think, what, I'm actually a leader and I'm reasonably effective at this? Was there this moment or transition, or it just kind of happened?
I think it's built up over time. It's been a combination of my own efforts and desires, but I also have been the benefit of, I've had some very good coaching and training and over the time, and I've worked in some really good organizations and worked with some really good people. So I'd say like I've generally been lucky that the majority of things I've done have been like a really positive experience, and I've sort of learned something that's going forward. But I would say I probably started really thinking that, I actually sort of, this is what I do, and my style became more mature, probably about 10 years or so ago.
Mm. One thing I picked up early, I found the same journey, in my leadership journey was it just evolved to that. There wasn't like a sudden light bulb or anything. It was like eventually realizing that, I'm actually not too bad at this now, whereas I used to suck at it. I used to not want to have those conversations with people because it made me feel uncomfortable. Well, now I'm having them despite feeling uncomfortable. I'm having those conversations anyway. I'm going to shift a little bit. There's something that you said earlier that's been kind of buzzing around in my head, which I thought was a little bit entertaining. I said about you being adventurous, and you said, nothing too extreme. And I'm like, well, living for a year in one of the place, most remote places on Earth, with like 16 or so people, or maybe a few more in the summer. But
where you can't get out of your bedroom due to lazy loafing elephants.
Exactly. It's like, to me, it's about perspective. Like for you, that may not seem very extreme. For me, that's incredibly extreme, and I'm sure a lot of other people think that. So, taking your perspective into account, this is, as you said, you've had this as a bit of a goal, a bit of a dream for some time. You're now living that at the moment. I think you said you were 3 months in of the 12 months, approximate 12-month stint. What's next then? What other things are on that list? If this is not that extreme, are they more extreme? Are they similar? Like, what other goals and aspirations do you have beyond, Macquarie Island?
Well, look. This is my first job working with the Antarctic div, and I like it. I like the place. So I would, the future I think would hopefully see myself doing more of this. I'm sure my partner Hazel won't be listening, so I won't send her the link to the podcast. So we're yet to discuss that. But the reality is, once you sort of got an opportunity like this and done this sort of work, it does create other opportunities. I'd probably just be looking for things that are a shorter time frame. In the short term, really, my goals are to get back and really get back into our lifestyle and on our property, where we grow our own food and have animals and do all these sorts of things. And what I like, I'm not sure if you've ever read anything from, there's an English fellow called Alistair Humphreys, who pioneered this little term called micro adventures. And it's sort of acknowledging that a lot of people out there, that people feel that adventure is something that you have to climb Everest, or you have to cross the Antarctica solo and unsupported or something. And it's something that makes it out of touch for the majority of people. But sort of, and Alistair Humphrey is one of these fellas, he's cycled across the world and done all these big things, but he's become a parent, and he's got a relationship, and he's got a job, and got all these sorts of things. And he sort of creates little, what I call achievable adventures, of things you can do at a weekend, things you can do locally, things you can do nearby, where you can still do live an adventurous life, but just doing things that are smaller, bite-sized chunks that are close to home and achievable. And I just want to do a lot of those sorts of things, because doing that regularly, it's like taking a bit of medicine. It's sort of, they're the tonic which sort of make life worth living. So, finding lots of those, a lot of those I do with my partner, and that's what, really drives a lot of happiness in my life.
Yeah, and you sound like a very, very buoyant, very positive person. In your core, what is it that keeps you motivated? What gets you up in the morning, keeps you motivated, particularly when you're in an environment like you're in at the moment? Obviously, having that strong sense of intrinsic motivation is very, very important. What is it that drives that for you?
Oh, look, I think gratitude is a very powerful emotion and incentive. I think just waking up every day, we get a bunch of choices every day with how we work and how we live, and sort of waking up every day and making that choice of like, today's going to be a good day. I'm in an amazing place and I'm doing really good things, and that straight away just sort of sets your mindset in the right frame to tackle away in a positive manner. And the same thing with the team. With the team here is, I'm the Minister of Smiles and I'm the Minister of Communication. I've got a whole bunch of other jobs. I've got a Minister of Energy and a Minister of all these other sort of people that sort of do stuff to make the place work. But my role is to provide a positive bias and keep everyone sort of happy and smiling and working in the same direction.
Just exploring that as well, Derek. You're a positive guy, Minister of Smiles, but along the way, you must have had the odd knock or two, the odd failure, or the moments where you just sort of any major events in life that kind of provided that other side of the spectrum where you had to sort of demonstrate that resilience and pick yourself up.
Look, there was probably I would say the personal event which probably caused me the most grief, which I learned the most from, was going through a separation and divorce. And this was, more than 15 odd years ago. After I left the military, I joined a British multinational called Smiths, and sort of pretty quickly moved from Sydney to Singapore, and arguably probably got promoted a little bit too quickly. So I was sort of in my early 30s. I was a regional vice president, living in Singapore, traveling all over the world, and had a really busy life. And at the same time, I'd only just recently been been married, and I struggled to keep it all together in terms of I had this super stimulating professional life and great job. I was working with all my mates and in a really growing industry, but at the same time trying to juggle that with my personal life and have good relationships and everything else. I didn't find that balance. And so when that sort of came apart, that did sort of put quite a big personal shock on me. I took that quite hard. And to get through that, by choice, I went and sort of did a bit of counselling and a bit of soul searching. And initially, I sort of, you approach that with the same, a lot of sort of problem solving. You're focused on the other person. They did this or they did that, or that's what she did, or it was her fault, and all that sort of stuff. And the main thing I learned from the counselling was just to focus on what you can control. And you sort of was taught that pretty quickly. It only took a couple of sessions, and it sort of just clicked. And I was like, shit, it's actually not about the other person. It's not about the environment. It's about me. It's just about how I can think and how I can control. And yes, your personality is your personality, but you can control your behaviors, you control your way you think. And that sort of really changed me. And then after that, I took a change of direction. I sort of said, well, actually, as much as externally, this sort of life I'm doing is sort of giving a lot of external pleasure and motivations, I actually wasn't really enjoying, had to be honest, I wasn't really enjoying myself. So I took a year off and traveled the world. I spent a few months volunteering for an English charity in Borneo, where I was sort of an outdoors guide, leading school-leaving kids through the jungle. And that's where I met my current partner. And it was just purely on accident. And since then, life has just been exponentially better. And that relationship has been, I suppose, the core of my sort of happiness for 15 odd years. And that's provides such a strong foundation to the rest of my life. It's just been brilliant.
And interesting that you made that decision, mate, to go from, I know Smiths, and they're a big company, and it's an exciting life and a lot of money floating around, and you stay in there long enough, you're going to have a big house somewhere and a boat and a car and all the good stuff. So clearly in there, you made the decision. And this is an area I think you and I both love, Sean, is the few decide success looks very personal to them, and it's always different. It's not all about money. So from an emotional perspective and a purposeful perspective, how important was that change?
Look, it was really important because just the year off it just gave me something. I'd had these little triggers of things I wanted to do. Like I really just wanted to have some time myself. I wanted to travel. I wanted to take a year off. I wanted to have no responsibilities. I wanted to just have fun because to some extent I'd left school, joined the army, gone to university, done training, followed jobs. It always sort of followed my nose from job to job to job, and sort of the job was the focus. And at that time when I did that, I was about 35, and I just really wanted to take some time out for me. And I did that. And then look, when I came back from that, I came back to serious jobs. I was working at big companies like, Raytheon and, managing, a couple $100 million projects and other things. And certainly there was, re-injected plenty of professional stimulation and stress back into my life. But my mindset was a lot different of how to tackle that. And I sort of prioritized my personal life and my personal relationships, and they always came first. And I worked everything else around that. And within that context, balance is, you don't get balance every day. Balance is something you achieve over time, but it was done in a measured and considered way. And it was in an agreed way that, the next couple of months are going to be really busy. We're going to sacrifice some personal aspects whilst I work really hard. But then the flip side after that, we're going to do something else. And it was the same thing. It was a trade-off with my partner as well, with things she wanted to achieve. But we just did that. We just made that process conscious, and it became part of our life. And we both sort of agreed with, because we had clarity of where we wanted to go, how it all fit together into a bigger life picture.
That's amazing. And clearly you've had a very, very varied and, potentially, colourful life as many people have in different ways, and learning things through relationships and through different, sort of soul searching and all that sort of stuff. Through all of that, if you could take one of the core lessons, or even more than one if you think there's more that are powerful enough, and go back to a younger version of yourself and pass that lesson on, what would you tell a younger version of yourself?
Oh, look, I think the first one is have the have the courage to be who you are. I think, that when you're young, you've got the massive all these various pressures. You're trying to be someone else or project an image or do something like that. The courage to actually sort of accept, this is who I am and this is my personality and this is what I like and this is what I don't like, and sort of be true to that is hard. And I think when you're sort of helping with young people, it's how to give people the confidence to go through that thought process and do that. Secondly, I think, just keep investing in relationships, is whether that's relationships with family or friends or others or acquaintances, is just that continual investment in people and relationships and giving to others the way you'd like to be given to yourself is a major investment that will always sort of pay you back through the rest of your life. And I think thirdly is just have a bit of a vision for your life. What, like you said, like you talked about a few people having a different idea of success isn't the same for everyone. And that's true. Not everyone's going to be Elon Musk or something like that, but just because you've got more different goals or lower level goals or something like that doesn't mean they're not fantastic and doesn't mean they're not right for your life. So spend a bit of time investing there. What's the vision for a really good life for you, and then go after that.
There's so many common themes when we ask those questions. Always ends up coming back to being yourself.
I love it. It just lands people, every time. It is
vision.
It's like, yep, there it is again. And it's so true. And one of the real, for Sean and I, Derek, this is a selfish indulgence, this podcast, to be honest, because having the opportunity to speak with people like yourself and hear those stories, and having so many of the adventures and experiences you have resonate, with our personal lives, but also with the lives of the other people we have here. So, mate, that's really insightful. You are doing a dream job down there, something that is incredibly rare and unique. No doubt you'll continue that adventure. But thanks so much, Derek, for taking the time out of your penguin watching and seal herding to share life on Macquarie Island on the fringe of Antarctica. There, it's been really insightful.
Yeah, thanks, Derek.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Boo. Really enjoyable experience, and appreciate the time. And thanks for hooking me up and having a chat.
Well, good luck with the next 9 months and down there, and hopefully the return trip is pretty close to time.
Yeah, it'll be close. It'll be close enough, mate. But I won't book any holidays for the immediate sort of future. We'll wait and see.
Actually, do you have to do 14 days quarantine if you've been in Antarctica? You would think that you're kind of off the hook, right? That must be a travel bubble right there.
No, not on the way back. We jumped through quite a few hoops to get down here with a lot of time in quarantine and all sorts of stuff. But hopefully we won't have to worry about that when we get back.
And that wraps up another episode of The Few. Thank you to our partners, Afterburner, for team building, development and alignment. We understand now how important it is to have the right people around you. Get them on board with where you want to go. Momentum Media, the largest industry publisher in the country, connecting your business to the Australian community. ICMI, Australia's premier speaker bureau, representing the few that do fulfill their life's purpose. And finally, Sean's Inner Circle, the business coaching organisation for small and medium enterprises looking to make that next step. Thanks again for listening in and downloading today. Please leave a review on whatever platform you are currently listening to this podcast, and reach out to our partners who can help you make the transition to the few.
Awesome.
Thanks so
again,
much, mate. Take care.
Cheers.